Hi, everybody. We're going to give everyone a few minutes just to trickle in. Really quick, my name is Holly. I am going to be your question proctor today. I'll be asking Seth and Brandon all of the questions that have come in and all of the questions that continue to come in.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Vizela Xweather Developer Q&A. This is our second one of the series. We're continuing on from our API that we did last time, and we're moving on to our raster maps today. And then after this, we're going to keep going with our Maps.gl product. That API video that we talked about that we did last time was actually recorded, and you can find a link. Holly has it posted. But yeah, this is a great opportunity, really. It gives us the opportunity to meet with customers like you guys, and hopefully gives you guys something as well with being able to talk to us. You know, we're not just the robots behind the scenes. You know, we're humans building things that are trying to build cool tools so you guys can build cool products for customers. So I'm Seth Miller starting off. I'm the Backend Team Lead. My team and I get the opportunity to work on the data ingest, data APIs, maps, and actually I was the principal engineer on the Raster Maps project here that we're talking about today. And yeah, it was really fun, cool project. And yeah, it's been really successful for us and fun to work on over the years. But sitting next to me is Brandon Click.
Hey guys, really happy to be here today, talk to you about the raster maps. Couple things about me before we get started. Been around here working with Seth for about 8 years, dating back to the Xweather days. A lot of my time has been spent working on the raster maps, both from a customer support perspective as well as QA. So a lot of the processes we use today, a lot of the test suites we've done, I was help making and involved in. So whenever bugs would trickle our way into production, we should blame Seth still, don't blame me. In recent years, I've actually switched to the back-end development team working under Seth, so I do get to play kind of behind the scenes or on the dark side, if you will. And the last thing I want to mention is one of the mantras I come with, or I started several years ago, is weather never sleeps. So I've been trying to make that trendy. I've been trying to make that a thing. It's only stayed in Minneapolis in our little office, so I'm putting it out in the world right now.
They had it as your email signature in there.
Yeah,
so
it still is.
It's still there. Okay, so we're going to make weather never sleeps happen. All right. So just some updates and announcements as we get going here. We had a data API release actually yesterday, so it's kind of fresh off the presses. Brandon, you want to talk about that real quick?
Yeah, absolutely. So some pretty significant changes with the weather API yesterday. One of the big ones is we changed the way we ingest our alerts and the way we store them. That's going to set us up for the future to be able to add more regions as we go along. Shout out to my guy, Alex Stone, who worked tirelessly to make that happen. So we're really happy with those results. That's been a seamless transition to customers, so alerts should still work the same. However, the one big change is we've added Australia, both the continent and the country, because they're the same.
Good.
We've added that to our suite of products, so helping out our folks down there. Couple other things we've done. We now have a Lightning Analytics endpoint, which is essentially an extension of our Lightning endpoint, but it has more analytical data powered by the Vizela Lightning Network. So now we have the ability to capture damage potential as well as error ellipse for lightning strikes. Speaking of Lightning, we now allow the Polygon queries in our archive endpoint, our Lightning archive that is. So customers who want to go in and query for a location or a polygon, an area, and get archive data, they can do that now. A couple other endpoints we've added. We've expanded our historical offerings, so both air quality and maritime, we now have archive data available, so customers can go back and see what has happened several weeks and months ago as we continue to roll that out. Another big change we saw with the with the weather API.
There's one. We talked about this during the API.
I wasn't supposed to say that.
Xweather.
Is the cost headers. So we've added more headers now to be more transparent with customers and let them know what their queries are costing them. And we're going to slowly roll this out. We have some documentation on it today, but we're excited to allow customers to now see what this is costing them and how we're charging for it.
Yeah, and like Brandon said, as we roll this out, we want this to be able to serve customers better. So some queries where you were maybe limited before, well, that's because we had to, charge per hit to keep the lights on. But now we're looking to expand different functionalities of the API and kind of decouple it a little more from our cost structure. And that's what these cost headers are really designed to do, is to be able to tell customers like, hey, this is how many tokens or kind of hits this costs. So as we expand that out, keep an eye out for those. And if you're curious about that, we'll have more announcements and updates as we expand that functionality. So I will flip back. Yeah, and some other notable updates too that we wanted to shout out real quick. The MapsGL Apple SDK is in beta 6. That's becoming more stable, but we're still looking for feedback on that. If you guys have an opportunity to play with that, or if that's something you're interested in, please give that a look on GitHub. We have that as a public repository out there. Some upcoming releases. Yeah, the MapsGL iOS and Android SDKs are on the horizon, and then hot off the heels of the previous release for the alerts expansion. Some additional countries coming as well. And if you have ideas or you're excited about a certain country, please let us know. That's data that we can try and source for different areas, and alerts are a really cool product. So before we jump into questions, I wanted the first one, and actually first couple I guess we got, were more of an overview. Lots of general questions about like, what is maps, kind of how does it work? So let's start with that. The general questions about raster maps, like primarily it's an XYZ tile service. So that is a standard that helps us easily integrate into existing maps and mapping libraries like Google Maps, Mapbox, Leaflet, a lot of the vendors that you're probably familiar with. Since it's standard compliant and you can just query tiles from the service using that standard XYZ templated format, you can really easily plug in weather data into your existing maps. So that will be usually just even like a single line of code that you can add to just add a layer. Our authentication is very simple. You don't have to do a lot of back and forth in order to request tiles. It's just there and ready to go. We do offer SDK for integration. That can help a lot with animation specifically. That's a really tough one. A lot of these mapping platforms are made to just serve a single, like, here's your data, and then you're kind of it. But animation is tough because it's actually a lot of different layers that have to turn on and off and kind of fade in between. So our SDKs will do that for you. And that's just a really great use case for those. There's also other fun things in there like layer selection and other pieces. But if you're integrating maps, the SDKs can bolt on top of your maps that's already existing, or it can help you start from scratch. So that's the tile component of raster maps, but there's also a like static map component, we call it. And that will be more of like your full image of a TV for like a display. It could be an image on a web page. It's like a little square in the corner, kind of whatever you're feeling there. That's an actual, you can define like the city center you're looking for, the zoom, or you can give it a bounding box as well. But ideal for those digital displays and web pages. And with our raster maps, you can combine different layers on the server side to give you the look and feel that you want. So it's not just, only radar. It can be radar and the satellite clouds and storm cells. And we'll talk about more of that stuff later. But you can really get everything created and boiled down to just a single image URL that you can use in an HTML image tag. And it just slaps right in there.
It's like magic.
We'd like to think so.
Yeah.
But it also includes base maps as well. So raster maps isn't just weather data. It has the base, whether it's terrain data that's like kind of mountain looking, or if it's just a flat kind of black map. It also, like, satellite geocolor is a fun one to use as like a base map, so you can see almost real time what the weather is like. Lots of those pieces, as well as the admin layers, we call them, with the roads and the state outlines to give people context. So you can really build up a complete solution in a single image URL, which is great. So that makes it easy to use. But it is a little more static. So that's where the difference between raster maps and maps.gl comes in, is maps.gl is that more interactive experience. So it was designed to be used for interactive devices, whether that's mobile phone devices where you're zooming and panning and doing all sorts of stuff, or desktop displays as well. It's just a richer visual experience and just more interactive experience. So you can
more
render
magic.
More magic.
Yeah.
There you go. There's magic on the server, magic on the client side to render it all. There's different color ramps you can choose from on the fly, which is pretty fun. So there's our standard colors, but then you can actually define your own set of colors that may match a branding theme that you have. You can filter for data. So if you only want like the freezing temperatures, you can do that on the fly with data that's returned. You can live query the data by mousing over it. The wind particles that people love that are flowing around. It also has more smooth animations as it transitions between frames. It's a richer user experience, but it does require the SDK to get started just because there is so much going on with that platform. And it's not going to work for all scenarios. Like if you have a digital display that's being run by something that's not super powerful, or if you just have a web page you want to get up and going quickly, Raster Map still has a great place in the market and a great use case behind it. So raster maps are what we're focusing on today. Maps.gl, like we mentioned earlier, is coming up in the next kind of Q&A. But yeah, let's move on to some questions. Holly, you want to get us going?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that overview, Seth. So the first question that we received beyond kind of the general questions was, what weather models do raster maps use? And then a little more, flavor to that is, how is this different from the API, and how does it work without querying the API?
That's a lot of questions in one, but I'm going to attack them all here. So I'll start off fairly simple. So we do have some of the, we'll call it off-the-shelf models available, and that's some of those are GFS, the NAM, the HER, the NDFD, and these are accessible through modifiers. So for example, if we take a layer such as F temperatures, which is going to be our forecast temperatures layer, and you append it with a dash GFS or dash NAM, it'll spit out that very specific model, just that raw data colorized with our legend. So that's one option, and one of the options for models that we provide. In addition to that, we talk about current and past data, where we kind of use a proprietary blend of models. One of those models includes the RTMA, which is really good for observation data, but they only cover, I believe, like CONUS, Alaska, Hawaii, US, Guam, and Puerto Rico. So then we do some other things to kind of cover the rest of the globe as well. Now, when we talk about the different models we have access to, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Weather API and Maps.gl, because they currently use a different model. Again, a proprietary blend, a different flavor that we've integrated out into the world. And this is a newer model. Raster Maps is not using this today, but it's a tried and true. We've proven this model to be better, and we're incorporating some of the Vaisala data sets, the Vaisala models into it. We've compared to some of our competitors. We've compared to what happens in real time, as time goes by. And like I said, we believe this to be better. So one of our goals in the near future for raster maps is to seamlessly roll this out into our forecast layers. So what's cool about that is the customer will continue to ask for F temperatures, for example, and nothing changes for them. They don't have to change any code. They don't have to change the way they're calling or making up requests. But behind the scenes, we'll just make it better. Ideally, that's the goal, right? So that's something that we're really excited for customers to start seeing, and once we get that rolled out.
And that's been something fun with just kind of building APIs and being on this data team in general, is like we can create this interface for customers. Mm-hmm. Like, here's how you access data. And then over time, we can just make that better.
Yep.
And customers don't have to change anything. So that's what's fun, like Brandon mentioned with this F temperature stuff. It's like, yeah, it's using a model that's pretty good, but now it'll just get better and you don't have to change anything. It'll just look even better, look great.
Right.
It validates better. Yeah, it's a cool spot to be in.
There's no migration docs or anything like that.
It just goes.
It just goes. One of the questions people might ask themselves is, well, if you have a proprietary blend that we believe is best, why do you offer the raw off-the-shelf options? And really, there's a small use case, definitely smaller than the proprietary best blend, but there is a use case oftentimes in the broadcast industry for meteorologists where they want to use the model they're comfortable with. They want to use the model they're used to for different use cases. So we have that available. We're already downloading the data. It's simple enough at that point to just make it available for people. So we're able to hit both of those use cases, and we're happy to continue doing that. And then I think the last part of this question had to do with how are we able to access raster maps without querying the API? Well, essentially, they're two isolated platforms. So raster maps kind of has its own system, and then the weather API has its own system as well. Little caveat there, the API will feed data into raster maps, but that all happens before the client ever makes a request. It happens behind the scenes. It's saved and ready to go. And then how do we do that? Well, we're downloading all this data, and essentially we save it in two different formats. One format is optimized for the weather API, where customers can query by point and get a bunch of data back, and then help them make business decisions with that information. The other side of it is optimized for visualization, painting pretty pictures. And so, again, with the raster maps and the weather API being in isolated platforms, we're able to save those two different formats and then access them differently for those use cases.
Thank you, Brandon. Next question we received is, could you share some general best practices on raster layers, specifically how to optimize for user experience?
Yeah, awesome. So yeah, we take optimization in a couple different ways, right? And so like Holly mentioned, user experience, but then there's also optimizing for like bandwidth and cost. So as we look at a few of those, there's actually different strategies you can take for each one. So let's first start off with user experience. That's what we try and focus on first, and then make compromises after that. So yeah, user experience, combining active layers is one that you can use. So if a user is curious about 3-4 different layers, if you put those all in your URL at once, the server will render those and give you them back all at once. So you have less pop in and things as you're trying to load up your map. So that can help a lot. Also, using the @2x modifier, and this is in our docs as well, but it might get missed. If you have a high resolution display, you can use that @2x. I think Apple kind of pioneered that when they came out with their Retina displays back in the day. Fancy stuff. But it'll render 512 by 512 tiles instead of the 256 by 256 ones. So it will take those and render that same data just larger, but then when you put it back on a high resolution display, it gets shrunk back down again, but it looks a lot more crisp, so you don't get those fuzzy edges. So that can be really helpful, especially for mobile users. But then using our SDKs, like I mentioned before, for animations and things, that can really help with user experience. There's a bunch of caveats and hurdles and unhappy paths you fall off of when you're developing animations, and we've tried to hit a lot of those already. So give our SDKs a try. That can really help a lot with those animations, and it can help make a really pretty map that smoothly goes between layers instead of kind of jumping around and popping too much.
And we try and take the hard parts out with those SDKs. So
yeah, we try and do the server side rendering and all of these things, the server side time resolution, so you can do plus 3 hours or whatever with whatever your layer. We try and smooth over a lot of the speed bumps for you. So bandwidth, kind of the next one that we want to optimize for. This actually goes kind of the other way, where we can request tiles separately. So where I said before, you can request them all to minimize that pop-in. But if you have bandwidth constraints, maybe just show users one at a time. And then as they're turning layers on and off and whatever interactivity they have, that'll actually cache better on the client's browser. And then it won't re-request all of that data if they turn a layer on and off or whatever. You can also request images in different formats. So I mentioned, I think above, where it's just PNGs, PNGs are great. They're true color, lossless compression that has transparency. Great format, big format. So what you can do is request them as JPEGs as well. So you can just change that extension at the end of your request. And you can actually change the compression ratio as well. So if you have JPEG 80, we'll actually drop it down to 80% JPEG compression. Now you lose your transparency ability, but if you're using our base layers and everything and you don't care about that, then that can be a great option to reduce bandwidth. And then the PNG 8 is also available, which is the indexed PNG. So if you're viewing something like radar, there's actually not really a big difference between the full true color PNG and the PNG 8. So that can be really helpful too. We have customers that are up in the wilderness, boundary waters. Yeah, we're out of Minneapolis, so the boundary waters are a popular area up north with limited cell coverage, as you might imagine. But yeah, hunting apps, fishing apps, all of those with limited bandwidth scenarios that have implemented some of these little tweaks to really help with that user experience and get data to their customers' hands quicker out in the field. So then last optimization, cost. We understand that push comes to shove sometimes. But yeah, animation is awesome, but it's also kind of expensive. So where you were drawing a page or drawing a map once, now if you animate it, you multiply your cost by every frame. So animation can tell a really cool story. But if you're really, cost constrained and you're fine with a little more plain of an experience, let somebody opt into that, right? You can have the play button there, just maybe don't autoplay. Maybe somebody opened the app and then closed it real quick and it's like, well, shoot, they didn't even look at it. So yeah, having those features available but opt in can help a lot. Bandwidth optimizations, the same thing applies here, where if you're caching a layer, then you're not re-requesting it. So it's not dinging you for cost. So if you request radar and then request satellite separately, well, if somebody turns the satellite off, they're not re-requesting radar again. You're not using 2 map units for radar and satellite layers. You're just using one as people turn things on and off. It can lead to pop-in and things like some of the things I talked about earlier. But if you're okay with that experience, and you might be able to manage that and have it look great. So using our SDKs can help with that as well. Those try and optimize pieces for user experience and cost as well. That's what I got.
Good job,
Seth.
Seth.
All right.
A+.
Brandon, you're going to be excited about this next one. What severe weather forecasting options are available with raster layers?
Severe weather, probably one of the most exciting parts about what we do, oftentimes why people are interested in the weather. You heard me say weather never sleeps earlier, and severe weather is certainly no exception to that. I'll first talk a little bit about the weather API. We believe that gives customers the ability to make actionable decisions. It's something that people can make business decisions based on that data, and specifically with severe, considering what's at stake with that, and then go out and make those decisions. On the flip side, with raster maps, we believe raster maps tells a story, especially when you start getting into animations. It can tell you what has happened, what is happening, and what's going to happen in a very easily extensible format, and it's easy to view for really any users. People without any weather experience can look at a map and start to understand what's going on. So one of the biggest things related to severe weather that we offer is the alerts. You heard me talk about that earlier. We added Australia as a region, but we also cover right now US, Canada, Europe, and we continue to expand in that front. Alerts are going to be able to tell people what's maybe happening in the next 30 minutes out to a few days ahead of time, depending on the type of alert we're looking at. In addition to alerts, we provide a tropical suite of layers, and this one's pretty cool because by default we have our tropical layer that's accessible, and it'll show you the hurricane or tropical cyclone or tropical storm, whatever your region calls it. Typhoon too, don't forget about typhoon. We can show that by default, and that'll show you the current position, the forecast error cone, the track, what's led up to there. But also we offer the ability to plug and play with all of those different components. And I think Seth is showing them right now. So if you don't...
this is in our map builder, by the way. This is like once you sign up, you can play around with the map builder. It's a really great way to really discover layers and kind of how you can play with them and turn them on and off. So yeah, I'm just showing that as Brandon's going through here.
Yeah, and so if there's a component of our kind of default tropical display you don't like, you can go in here and start plugging away and picking pieces and make your own display. So that's a pretty cool feature with the tropical suite. In addition to tropical, we have storm cells. Storm cells are going to be able to give up to 60-minute forecast in terms of what these cells are doing, and it's going to project whether or not these cells have hail tendencies, they have tornadic tendencies, or just general thunderstorm. Another kind of unique use case, maybe getting a little bit more flexible in terms of severe weather forecasting here, is the FQPF Accum and the FQSF Accum. And I know that's a lot of letters and acronyms, but essentially we're talking about forecast precipitation and forecast snow accumulation. So both of those things, especially in the northern hemisphere, or the northern part of the country and northern parts of the world where it gets cold, FQSF comes into play. And then FQPF specifically, I can recall using that one when Hurricane Harvey was making landfall down in Texas in the Houston area, and watching the color ramp get maxed out. as we talked about.
Yeah, we had to fix it.
Yeah, we had to fix it, but not only we had to fix it, Noah had to fix it as well.
We had to add more colors.
More colors because
it was brutal.
There was so much rain. And then a little bit more about some of the severe capabilities. The SPC, which is the Storm Prediction Center, they're responsible for basically telling the country, our country, about what is going on for severe weather, specifically like thunderstorms, hail, tornadoes, things of that nature. And we have a convective outlook and all the suite of products from the SPC available within the raster maps. While the SPC does a good job of showing that data, and they have the ability to download it and show it, they don't necessarily make it pretty. And that's where we come in. So you can slap these layers into an interactive map, which is not available with the SPC. In addition to that, if you look at some of our observation layers, such as lightning or storm reports, while that won't give you necessarily the forecast, it'll help you determine what may be happening based on past events. So these are just some of the capabilities we have with severe weather. I'm sure there's more out there, and especially as people start, oh, that's a cool
I found
visual.
a lot of lightning.
There's a ton of lightning.
I think this is Texas. They're getting, Texas.
Good times. Good times. But yeah, there's a ton of capabilities out there, and it's kind of up to you guys to kind of show us what you got. So
yeah, we're always excited to see what customers build with these tools. So yeah, please play around, look at the map wizard, and let your mind run wild and be creative.
Love the question about severe weather. You can tell we're all pretty passionate about that here. I will share a link to our documentation in just a second so that you can check out the rest of our weather layers as well. Worth noting, we've got wildfires. There's a bunch of other great layers in there that you can check out that are super timely right now. Before we jump to the next pre-registration or pre-webinar question, we actually did have a pretty great question come in from Jeff that I want to answer because it kind of piggybacks off of this.
Sweet.
Is high resolution L2 radar data available?
We do not provide the level 2 data at the moment. That's a great question though. So yeah, the Maps GL, we've actually toyed around with it. And that's been kind of the platform that we've used to investigate that. The level 2 data, like in the US, we use the MRMS composite. And for most users, that's really what people want to know. Like, is it raining on my head? So we've tried to optimize for that use case where like the level 2 data can give you all sorts of really interesting feedback. The velocity stuff is really cool. Being weather nerds, I think we fire up level 2 data to really dive into some of those. But that's a great use case though. If you have kind of more of what you're looking for, either in the chat, please expand on that to us, or if you want to send us an email privately. I mean, we'd love to hear that use case because it is something that we've been diving into more, especially as we look for more severe products that can tell better stories. Good question, Jeff. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Seth. All right, the next question that we received: what customization options are available with raster layers?
Oh yeah, the customization. I'll flip back to my display here. So the customization, we talked about kind of the layers and the modifiers. So this is just our raster maps docs. I'm in on the layers, and over in overlays is kind of a fun place to start. So like our admin layer, that's where I talked about where that's the streets and the city names and country and state outlines. We have modifiers on these that are kind of down at the bottom here where you can do admin and then like -LG. And like in this case, the LG stands for large. So it will make the text stand out more for a broadcast use case. There's like cities in the -DK for the dark, so that will work better on dark maps or give you kind of more contrast on these light maps. And there's a lot of these all over. With tropical, we've basically like split them out into different layers just because it got to be so many. But yeah, there's lightning all. These are all kind of modifiers as well. So there's like just strikes, but then there's like the strike icons. So we can really show a lot of these different pieces, and there's just so many different layers. I think it's like several hundred actually when you put all the layers together.
I think Seth is bragging.
It was a lot to put together. So yeah, there's just a lot there as we look through that. But then there's some other cool stuff like the modifiers, we call them. So there's kind of the basic ones like the opacity. That one's pretty straightforward, right? So as you're layering these different pieces together, you can control the opacity on the server side as they get layered and put together, so you can make the radar barely visible if that's your thing. But if you're trying to focus on something else, but you want, kind of an inkling of what's going on from another layer, that can work really well with multiple layers layered on top. But then the blend modes are pretty cool as well. So that's another modifier we offer. It has more of like your kind of photo editor or Photoshop sort of, what do they call them? Layers and layer. I forget what the actual term they use, but we call them blends on how to blend those on top of each other. So this overlay blend is really cool. This is on top of our terrain layer that lets the mountains show through, which is pretty cool. But there's all sorts of other ones you can do, like grain merge, and those are all documented down here. There's a lot of different ones that can give you some pretty funky stuff, but especially if you do like invert and exclusion and difference, you can actually like cut things out. It's pretty wild. The scale HSLA is another one that one is kind of complicated, but it deserves its own page. And this page is really cool if you're looking to do some really crazy stuff. So like this example, we're showing the fronts on the map here is pretty common to see. I remember looking at them in the newspaper back in the day.
You're not that old, Seth.
Okay. Back in my day, we had the newspaper. But yeah, so with this, we can just display the kind of base layer, but you can also do a really cool like shadow effect. So you can get these shadows and make them stand out in higher contrast against your background. But you can also do some crazy stuff. So where we have, like the lightning dots, like what can we do with that? Well, you can change the colors. Now they're orange. You can blur them. Like we really get into a sort of like heat map sort of use case as well. So there's some really cool stuff. If you find something in a cool combination, show it to us. We've been super impressed with a lot of the cool things that people have made. So yeah, give that a try. And like I said, they're documented on our documentation.
Thanks, Seth. This next question we've actually been seeing, I think, a little bit more buzz around. Could you talk a little bit about data integration options with raster maps? The specific example sent in was for UAVs or unmanned aerial vehicles for anybody not in the know. Just any integration opportunities for external data.
Yeah, awesome. So our maps, like I talked about earlier, we designed them to be really interoperable and as standard as we could. So if you already have a map with your assets on it or like a flight path for UAV stuff or whatever you're interested in, if you've already built a map, the chances are really high that we can integrate with that map really easily. So since we're just a tile server, like it can plug right in, like I mentioned before, again, with like a single line of code, you can usually just add one of our data sets. But then our SDK is also designed to work with an existing map already. So it can just kind of wrap it and add in our animation capabilities or layer selection as well. So make sure and give those a try if you haven't yet. But as far as like data sets that are that pertain to UAVs and different kind of low-level flight, winds, our standard wind layer is at 10 meters. That's pretty standard in the meteorological community. That can be really helpful for like drone type use cases that aren't flying too high. We also have the wind direction as barbs. So from stations, you can actually see the arrow pointing whichever direction and the magnitude of the wind that can be helpful, especially during kind of flight scenarios. But the severe stuff is also very relevant, especially if you're outside, you're flying, you have property, assets, people. That can be a big use case. So like the layers that Brandon talked about before, we got radar, lightning, storm cells, storm reports, all sorts of things that can affect just being outside in general, but maybe more so with a smaller aircraft. Visibility is another cool one. That's one, if you're going out to film, visibility could be, very relevant depending on how high you're flying or what your actual target is. Temperature for battery life's another one. We see that with our EV use cases a lot with our road conditions that we have. Temperature is huge for that type of scenario. Like if you can't complete your flight or complete your mission, that's a bummer.
Mission impossible.
Hopefully not impossible.
Yeah.
But you can help plan for that. But other like aloft type layers we don't offer at the moment, but we have talked about it quite a bit. So that aviation use case. So if you're up into higher levels of the atmosphere, or have use cases for that or some wants and needs, please let us know. Because that's something that we've been kind of collecting of over the years is like, well, what are people doing and where can we actually add value? So if you see, or if you have a need for that, and that's something that could work, let us know. That'd be great.
Yeah, we love figuring out what people are using it for and what they want to use it for, because sometimes we make business decisions and we have to figure out what's going to be cost effective for us and what's going to be helpful for customers. So as you see availability, different resources and things you want to see within Raster Maps, let us know. Reach out to support, reach out to your sales representative.
Yeah, we make products for people. We make tools so you guys can build cool stuff. So yeah, please reach out.
Awesome. All right. One additional question that we received. Could you guys talk about some additional use cases, or integration solutions?
Yeah, sure. I'll take that one. So one of the most common use cases we're going to see with Raster Maps is mobile apps. And we've got our maps in dozens of mobile apps out in the Google Play Store and the Apple Store. But one of the cool ones I've seen is geared towards motorcycle riders. So we've got our raster maps right in there. I think radar, maybe some other maps, but it helps motorcyclists determine kind of the route they want to take, and it helps them determine how long maybe they should take shelter depending on those conditions. So that's been pretty cool to see. One of the cool things about our products is this isn't necessarily the end product. We don't always know how they're being used. So when we put these things out in the wild, we kind of leave it up to customers to eventually show us what they're being used for, and that's really cool. One example of that is I can think several years ago, and ever since then, I was traveling somewhere from Minneapolis, the airport here, and you walk up to the display where it's got your departures and arrivals, and then next to that there's a weather map screen. It shows the CONUS, and then with the radar on top of it. And at first glance, I was like, that kind of looks like ours. And then I stared at it a little bit longer. I was like, oh, that is our maps. So that was really cool to see. I had no idea it was in the airport, and to see that out in the wild like that was kind of cool.
It is very rewarding when we're typing tappy tap buttons and doing things on the screens to actually see it out in the wild and see somebody come up with cool ideas and cool ways to mix it in. And yeah, that part's awesome. I just really like that.
I travel with my fiance, and she's gotten pretty sick of me every time I'm at the airport. Like, hey, those are our maps. A couple other cool use cases. Seth talked about satellite geocolor earlier. That's one of my favorite layers. It's just a really pretty layer of the blue Earth. And Seth's done a lot of work to incorporate all the satellites we have, or we have access to. So both GOES satellites, the Meteosat, right, for Europe, and then Himawari from Japan. So Seth has spent tireless nights going through and coloring pixel by pixel to make sure that blends really well.
That's my day job now, is to just color maps and then put them on the service. So
yeah, and I believe your daughter's a little bit better at it now.
Yeah, she's got some markers that she likes to use. So
yeah,
looking forward to that.
She makes better pictures than you. No offense. One of the other cool things, I talked about it earlier, is we put these products out in the wild. We don't necessarily know how they're being used. And Seth touched on it earlier, is these are very extensible. We have the capability to really integrate into any mapping library that supports that XYZ tile format. So obviously we've got Mapbox, Google, Apple Maps, Leaflet. Those are easily covered, but there's also ArcGIS. I've seen use cases with that. I've seen use cases with Here Maps. So again, it's part of what we wanted to do, what we wanted to accomplish with this, is putting it out there for really several different people to be able to use depending on their use cases, and they don't have to build something from scratch. They can just slap a couple lines of code of our stuff in there, and then boom, it's starting to work.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brandon. We did receive a couple of questions on the API as well, but I want to take a moment and just remind everybody to please enter any questions that you have prior to, and we'll take just a quick minute and wait for some of those questions to come in. But the first question that we received on the API surrounded optimizing and limiting API usage.
Yeah, so this is kind of optimizing for that cost, like we talked about with raster maps here. And we actually did cover this in our last Q&A. So again, find that video. And Lee went into a really good in-depth explanation, but optimizing API usage, I mean, it kind of comes down to it's hard to just say this is how to do it and save money.
Well, the question, when people ask about optimize, what do you want to optimize? Do you want to optimize cost? Do you want to optimize for speed?
Yep.
Do you want to optimize for accuracy? So we don't always know the answer. We need to understand your use case.
Yeah. So cost is one, and like Brandon said, the other actual user use cases and things. But we offer, some tools that aren't always obvious right out of the gate, like the batch queries, so you can lump a bunch of queries together, you get your answers back all at the same time. You can also use that to query for like an entire month of data through an archive. So you can optimize, I guess, usage and requests back and forth in that sense. But yeah, it really depends a lot. So if you have kind of some specific questions, please feel free to let us know, but also give that last Q&A a watch real quick as well.
Awesome. And then the last API question that we received is on hyperlocal historical weather data. Could you share a little bit more about your offerings for that, and in tandem with that, the visualization capabilities for hyperlocal historical mapping? Yeah,
so our data API goes back over 10 years with our high resolution archive.
Pushing 15 now.
Pushing 15, yeah. I suppose it goes up every year. That's how that goes. So as we go back, we have really high resolution data that we've compiled and that we save down. That's been quite the engineering challenge to make sure we can serve that data. But I guess that's by the wayside.
I'm glad it's not my problem.
But yeah, that's been a challenging problem. So yeah, we do have high resolution data for very common data sets. And like Brandon just mentioned, we're expanding that to other like marine and air quality as well. But then as far as visualization capabilities, we don't go back super far with our maps and maps GL. I think like 7 days is basically our standard. Radar, I know we go back like 30 days. Yeah. That is documented on the documentation page as well. But if you have a use case for going back further in data to visualize things, like we said, we're all about helping tell a story. So if you have a cool story or cool visualization, we could look into kind of serving that data up in a maps sort of scenario. But yeah, that's really interesting. Please let us know more about kind of what you're thinking there.
We got one question that came in the chat here from Ziad. Rather than placing one of your layers onto my pre-existing map, can I start with your SDK and integrate my data as a layer on top of that?
Great Absolutely. Question. Yeah, great question. So yeah, the SDK can start, but it exposes the map as like if you're in JavaScript world, it exposes that map. So you can further modify and customize that map.
I think we have documentation examples of that where, again, use the SDK, get things up and running, and go grab that map object if it's leaflet or whatever, and then you can start applying methods and properties to that map object.
Yeah, and if there's, if you have like a GeoJSON, of your assets or whatever you're looking to put on there, that was a use case we designed for. But yeah, feel free to reach out to like our support team. Our customer success folks are awesome, and they'll, certainly reach out to the dev team. That's our front end team that manages a lot of those toolkits. But they can certainly help you with something like that.
Great question.
Yeah, good question.
Fantastic question. So thank you everybody so much for jumping in today. Thank you so much to Brandon and to Seth for answering all of these questions. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to us, reach out to our support team, and keep an eye on your inbox for this session's recording that'll be coming tomorrow. Links to any of the resources that Brandon and Seth have mentioned today. So we'll give you some links to documentation and to these recordings and to the API recording as well. And then obviously stay tuned for details on our next developer Q&A session on MapsGL.